This is Paul Johnson with the New Frontiers. Today on our show, there are three different authors myself and my co author of our book, What's Right with America, Larry Aldrich. And we're talking to an author who wrote a book called Do More Good, Neil Ghosh. Now, Neil and I and Larry, we share stories of a variety of different people who had a big impact on us and our view of what's going on in the United States. People like Neil Armstrong, John Glenn, for that matter, Ronald Reagan and Mother Teresa, as well as Rosa Parks. A wide variety of people who all had this kind of optimistic view of the United States and the mission that we serve abroad. You'll find that there's lots of different similarities with the two books, but what was the most fun about this particular piece is that we spent time talking about how the current problems fit into the structures that we think made America great. The problems that are going on in LA today with the riots taking place on the streets and the president sending in the National Guard. We talked about the issues of Elon Musk and the president and what that may mean, the changing coalitions that are happening in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, as well as how there seems to be a big opening that's happening now for a third party or at least an independent movement because large groups of people are being alienated by both political parties. In any event, we enjoyed writing our book about this. It talks about the importance of the individual, which we think is center to what is right about America. In any event, I'm just an ordinary optimistic American who still believes that the United States is a great cause for good. If you agree with that, push that subscribe button and let's get this show going.
Destiny. Destiny. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. 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 You and I have a rendezvous with destiny.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Well, Neil, I'd like to welcome you to the Optimistic American today at New Frontiers. Larry, my co-partner, who wrote our book, What's Right with America. We're happy to have you on, especially because the book that you just wrote is fairly similar, at least in theme, to the one that we wrote, which is Do More Good. You have just an amazing background. I'd love to have you kind of start by talking about what was your end goal in writing this book, and also give me a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure. I think I love the name of the show for both of you because I always say I was born optimist. And that's kind of my journey all along. I've been fallen down many times. I think the book came about from three or four perspectives, Paul. One, I felt not just my childhood, I traveled across America and I traveled in 5 continents. And I saw the power of individual, not negating the power of the government, not negating the power of the policymakers and everybody, but I saw what individual can do in the most toughest of the situation. So I was also intrigued by your recent article that both of you wrote, where you talked about both the right and left agrees that the American value stands on individual behavior, individual power. So the book is all about what we can do, how we can do more good. And the power of individual, it doesn't matter how rich we are, it doesn't matter what we look like, it doesn't matter what political belief we may have, but individually, we have tremendous power to make a difference. So that was the motivation of the book. And I think I've been fortunate to meet some, as you can see from the book, a diverse group of individuals, both politically speaking, from John Glenn to Mother Teresa to Dalai Lama, who actually wrote the foreword for the book, and other people. And I was fortunate to learn from them. And I felt it's not me learning, but how can I share what they have taught me to the rest of the world? And another thing I've done, which I always feel is important because book gives us some information, but a lot of time I don't know what to do with the information. So in the book, what I've tried very hard, each chapter, at the end of each chapter, there is a resource section, which allow individual to take action. Whether you are pro something or against something, it doesn't matter. But I gave every chapter as a tool and an organization that you can join, you can volunteer, you can care about civil rights, or you can care about child hunger. You can care about child trafficking or anything else you can think of. But there's a resource you can be involved. So I think that was my goal, not just to inspire people, but give them a tool to take action.
So in our book, we have a number of stories from individuals as well, and that comes about probably from our involvement in both politics and just being old. You just start to meet a lot of people after some period of time in life. A couple of those folks were people that you were engaged with as well. Let's walk through some of the stories and lessons that you learned from them. And I'm going to start with one I haven't met, other than having just simply seen, which was the Dalai Lama. Can you talk about what he wrote your foreword? That in itself is amazing. But talk about the Dalai Lama and what lessons you take from him.
I think simplicity. I think simplicity. He has a unique power, no matter how tough a question you ask. Not that he's taking the question very seriously, obviously. He knows the subject matter pretty well. But the way he responds, it's anyone. You don't have to be a scientist or, have not a lot of jargon. So we talked to him about poverty. We talked to him about how to get engaged in Africa with his popularity and his presence. Every time we ask him something, I think his ability to empathize, which is a common ground, I would say. I think the second thing, when you come to my house, there is a big sign. It's not just a picture of Dalai Lama, just a writing. It says, "My religion is very simple. My religion is kindness." That to me resonated very deeply, Paul. As you have read, I spent time with Mother Teresa. I spent some time with the chief Muslim Imam in India. I also met Shimon Peres from Israel, because I was this journey that, coming back to your book and your thought process, that we have so much in similar. And I was trying this journey that how can we find the common ground? I'm not trying to convince you of your anything, but the common platform. I think Dalai Lama has done a superb job in reaching out to anybody. Doesn't matter whether they're from the same religion, same belief system, and able to build that bridge. That resonated with me very deeply.
Larry, you might just hit on kind of the five traits of what we think built America today, just because they fit into a lot of what Neil talks about in terms of characteristics.
Our five traits are. I use the mnemonic of SIGO. It's and we specifically talk about the confidence. That's our C. Imagination or innovation. We use both of those to some degree interchangeably. Grit, generosity, and optimism. And those are the traits that we've identified as kind of core to the American experience and to the American strengths.
Paul, can I make one comment? Would you mind if I make one comment? Is that okay?
No, absolutely.
10 years ago, approximately speaking, in 2015, Pew Research reached out to American. They do study all the time, the Pew Research studies. And they asked a very simple but profound question. What is the secret of America's success? It's a very profound question. And people answered, it's innovation, it's technology, it's our character, our moral character. Immigration came up, many different things. And I took that article, took the research, and I said, I'm going to write something. I published something at the Huffington Post. I called it my answer to that research. And I said, yes, all of them are true. I'm not arguing with them. But I said, my belief is the empathy. And Larry, you mentioned generosity. I specifically mentioned in that article that the empathy and generosity are the core of the DNA. And Paul and Larry, I'm not just saying this because I have experienced as a first generation citizen. I got it 40 years ago in Wyoming, in Kentucky. But I'm saying something which is extremely important. I was speaking on behalf of normal people, farmers, shopkeepers, Uber drivers in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. And we sometimes don't understand when we read the paper here. The power of America's soft power is incredibly touched me because I traveled with my work. I was with a Dutch NGO for 9 years, with Austria, and I worked with Australian. So why I say that, and because what I just heard from Larry, 10 years from now, this is after 10 years, and when I see the division and the disruption, it pains me deeply, and the digital overload. And at times, but I haven't lost my faith. I still, if somebody asks me, do you would write the article again? And this is the point I want to make very clearly because I have friends on both sides. I have a good friend who is a former Marine, and as Marine as you can go. and I have friends on. He's an evangelical Christian, and of course have friends on all sides. So I constantly argue that empathy is not a blue state value
Right.
or a red state value or a purple state value. It's an American DNA, and I can talk more about it. But I want to share the story that even in this division, I have not lost faith in.
Great. I mean, I think, and that'd be an interesting article to link to that we could put on our site too, because I certainly love to read it. And I think that's exactly right. We talk about generosity. It's when you have a hurricane or a tornado or a disaster, people simply show up to help. They help their neighbors, they help strangers. It's just kind of part of what America is all about. And I'm sure other countries say they do the same, but we just kind of do it as kind of just in our DNA, in our genes in America.
Yeah, and for me, I try to compliment Trump when I see something that's worth complimenting. I can tell you on AI technology, I think his administration's doing a really good job. And when I have a criticism, I mention that as well. The criticism that I would give, or one of them, is that I think he's making a mistake on the American psyche and how we see the issue of gratitude and empathy. We Americans are very proud of the Marshall Plan. We're very proud of the fact that we gave away the vaccine that he helped develop to the rest of the world to try to help make them better. That's part of our ethos. It's become a part of us. We love the idea that we have been able to be helpful to other people around the world, and we enjoy that generosity. We enjoy being known for that generosity. I think it's a political mistake to believe that all Americans have gotten to this point where we think that we've been abused and harmed and that we're being screwed over by everybody in the world and that we need to go out and get even. I don't think that's even close to how the average American sees things.
I agree. I think empathy is, we are trying to make empathy as a soft word. It's a strategic word. It's not it's I think that's a part we have to really clearly define it properly, what that means. Another division, I think there's a lot of confusion about the word patriotism versus global responsibility. It's not either or proposition. It is not either or proposition. To be a true American and a loving American, you have to, in particularly, Paul, you talked about AI. You think about any facet of our life, from the time we get up, from the time we go to bed, whether it's health, whether it's environment, whether it's disease, whether manufacturing. It's without knowing the world, we cannot function. Of course, there will be, and I'm a big believer of, by the way, just from my position, I believe in strict immigration policy, real immigration policy, but that's a different discussion for a different time. But what you said, that some of the words which are part of our DNA, we are making a negative word, and that pains me. That deeply pains. And I give you one example I will never forget. I was new. This is many, many years ago when Biden was a senator. And this is not a political statement. I'm making a different statement. And it just so happened I met Biden and McCain at the same time in the same room. And, he was a senator. I was just shaking his hand. I don't know what to say at that. I didn't have much, deep thoughts. With Senator McCain, I talked about a service disabled veteran. I have friends who are disabled veteran. I'm very much into that whole topic, that they need attention, they need care, they need our full attention. With Biden, I didn't know what to say, so I was shaking his hand. I said, am I shaking the hand of the next president of the United States? I didn't know what to say. So he gave this smile and he looked at McCain. He said, oh no, that's me, that's him. It was a light joke, but for me again, I'm repeating that you guys are born here. I came from another country. I'm a naturalized citizen. For me, it touched me to see that two individuals, politically so different, but they are friends at the end of the day. And they have a civil conversation, and that's something I really value, and I wish that we can do more of it.
Absolutely.
No, I agree. All right, so I have to give you my Mother Teresa story, and then we can hear yours.
Okay.
So my Mother Teresa story was, she was coming to Phoenix, and I was mayor, and she had sent a request to ask to meet with me. I was so excited. I thought, oh my gosh, Mother Teresa wants to meet with me. So we get the office set up. We kind of roll out the proverbial red carpet. We didn't actually have one, but nonetheless, we made it kind of a big deal. All the media was in the other room. She came in, and I don't know, maybe she was 4'11". She's whatever she was a very short person. And that's somebody, I'm 6'7", so maybe that's not fair, but she looked really short to me anyway. And as she came into my office, she's very nice, and I got her a chair, and then we got her some tea, and there were a couple of other women that were there alongside of her. And the minute the door closed, I mean, just the minute it closed, she said, "Mayor, I want to talk to you about a center that we're building down in South Phoenix. And this is for battered and abused women. And I want you to give me a commitment right now that you're going to support it." So I was kind of stunned and taken back, right? And I said, "Well, the council person from the district is a person named Mary Rose Wilcox, and she's been out in that district for a long time. And she's really the person that you should talk to." And she said, "I'll talk to Mary Rose Wilcox. I'm here to talk to you. And I want to know right now, will you support this or not?" I had cold sweats running down both sides. I said, "Well, Mother Teresa, I will definitely support that center." So anyway, she walks out. She goes down to see Mary Rose, and Mary Rose comes back, and before she met with her, and she said, she goes, "Mother Teresa wants to meet with me." I said, "Yeah." She was in my office. She goes, "Well, you need to support me on this case out there." I go, "Hey, I am not supporting you on that case in your district. You need to talk to her on your own." So she gets real mad at me. She says, "I can't believe you're abandoning me." She goes in and talks to her, comes back out and talks to me. She goes, I said, what'd she say?" She goes, "It looks like I'm supporting the center too." But
The power,
the part
the
that
power
was the power, but she was using it for a
for a good
good
cause.
cause. And boy, you talk about grit. She just had grit. The minute she was done asking me my question, she turned to be very nice. And then she said, "Mayor, is there anything else I can do for you?" And I was so stunned. I didn't have anything else to talk to her about. But in any event, I'd love to hear kind of what your story was with her.
I will say something different because I don't know your audience, but I want to share this. I I was born Hindu. There's a religion that I was born in. I joined other show the other day where they talked about the discussion was whether a religion play a part in politics or not, something of the nature. I was the guest and I was talking. I shared something and I will share with you. I although I was born Hindu, there was not a lot of religious teaching in my house because Hinduism is very different. It's like a philosophy. It's how do you live? That's the way kind of our mindset was. And what's the connection with Mother Teresa? And I shared with them, believe me or not, for me, religion, the concept of religion is other than what I saw around me was Mother Teresa, although I never met her. I met her much adult when I was with the Australian government. So as a very young boy, I thought, wow, this is cool. Religion is doing good things. Because when I thought about as a young boy, Mother Teresa, I saw the lady who was just selfless. That's the image we had as a child and growing up, that she was just dealing with utter poverty, lives in the same home where they live. She doesn't have another place to go, which is very different than anyone in the world I met. Anyone in the world. We all, whatever level of good we do, we have a home to go back to. Everybody. Everybody I met so far, except this person. Because she lived in the same place. So I shared that because that's way before I met her. Way before I met her. So my psyche, I connected religion, goodness of religion. There's a lot of other things, is with her and the value of religion. In terms of my meeting was less dramatic than yours. I was actually at that time working for the Australian government. I was a trade commissioner for the Australian government. I was based in Calcutta. Although I'm from Calcutta, but I went back with this position of promoting trade and investment between Australia and India. And I'm not Australian, which is a different story for a different time. But it was hard to open a trade office. So yes, you're right. I mean, we had our courtesy meeting, but the next thing she wanted was something very specific. And that's the way she operated. And some people find it hard, but that's her mission. Her mission is to do good. And she was, as I said, great, mission oriented. She knows what she wants, and she was going to get it. And that's my same experience.
Well, and to circle back to what we're all talking about, I mean, that's kind of what is built into the DNA of America. I think, hopefully, Neil, as you wanted to become a citizen of this country, you felt all of that, and you wanted to be part of that. And I think we have a tendency to take it for granted. That generosity, we take for granted. But when somebody needs our help, we're willing to step up and do it. Again, other countries do the same thing, but it's just a little different in America. At least that's our opinion.
All right, so we did our first chapter, which I'll let Larry describe in a moment, on the kind of the race to the moon. You met a very famous astronaut, and I'd love to hear what your opinion was of him and how the meeting came about.
The meeting came about. I I ran a global nonprofit or international development for 9 years. I worked so my I never follow a linear path. I never did like most people. I worked in private sector for many years. I worked for the Australian government for 5 years. I worked for the Dutch for 9 years as a head of a global NGO. I was a CEO of SOS Children Villages with orphanages. So I worked for the Austrian for 3 years or so. And I had a top secret clearance from the Department of Defense of US Department of Defense as a US government contractor. So I worked in many different. Coming back to John Glenn, it came about because at that time I was a member of the Clinton Global Initiative. So I was working very closely with the initiative, and he was one of the guests. And it appeared to me when I looked at his character, and I call him a true American hero for a reason. If you look at his every action, and it's not just a space thing, and there's certain thing I call it. Of course, you have certain talent, whether it's a technical talent, you're an astronaut, of course you have a talent. But if you go through his life, how he had carried himself, his values, I'm just mesmerized. And this is coming back to Larry. This is what, as a child, when we thought about America as a country, this is way before I came here. I was 22 when I came. This is the value we felt America hold. And John Glaze to me was I never thought I would meet him. You can imagine, meeting a true American hero. And I met his wife also at the same time. They both attended Clinton Global Initiative. So it was really a very touching moment, very touching.
Yeah, I met John Glenn during a period of time that, again, I was mayor and we were lobbying the Senate. I can't remember what it was on. Oh, it was the base closures. We were talking about base closure issues at the time, and gosh, it was just kind of amazing to listen to him because of all the people we spoke to. We got a lot of political answers, mostly people who were probably going to oppose us, but they didn't want to tell us, so they were kind of avoiding it. And he was just very direct about the mission, why the base closures were important to the long-term strategic interest of the United States. That what was on the list was going to be what he was going to hold to, but he laid out kind of this vision for us about how important it was to the country. And he says, I understand the value that this means to different local communities, but the way that he framed it and gave it back to us was so powerful that I don't think there was a single person in the room that left that didn't maybe respect him the most of the individuals that we had done meetings with. Larry, we talked about this going to the moon and the fact that you and I both as young kids were watching it on television and the feelings that we gained from it. But if you would talk about why we talked about that subject, why we made that the first chapter of our book.
Yeah, and just for our listeners who haven't had a chance to look at our book, basically, Paul was a little bit younger, just a little younger than I am. So he was on his bike and at the same time running home with his friends to watch this on television. I was coaching a little league baseball game on Long Island. Same activity, different places, different media, both just dropping everything we were doing to experience that landing. And so was virtually everyone with communication around the world. So America was on this. It was an American moment, but it was a human moment. And for me, especially, that triggered, that was right at the time I'm thinking about where I wanted to go to college. And I ended up going to engineering school. I wanted to build airplanes and spaceships. I ended up going to law school and becoming a lawyer. So I got deterred from that vision. Sometimes I wonder if I would have been happier doing that, but I'm pretty happy as a lawyer. So, I think the point was that was an American greatness moment that we shared deeply with everyone around the world. And, tears were brought to all of our eyes or our ears. Through our ears, we were listening all over the place. And I was on a podcast recently talking about that, and the podcast host was very provocative, and he said, "Well, wasn't that the high point of America? Wasn't that we really have slipped since 1969?" And of course, it gave me the opportunity to talk about Elon Musk and his landing the rocket with the chopsticks. I said, he steps on the back and the shoulders of NASA, but the American experience, the American innovation, and the American leadership, and the vision for the free world, and vision even for the unfree world, remains in place. So that was really kind of why we wanted to use that lesson that led to our own experiences. We wanted to share how that lesson led to American and worldwide experiences.
Yeah, and for me, it's an issue of self-agency, right? We get to choose how we interpret the events around us. That's our choice. I love Viktor Frankl and his book Man's Search for Meaning, the whole concept that we get to choose how that's going to be framed. But what we're seeing today is that increasingly people are ignoring many of the great things that are happening in this country, and they only focus on the negative. It's like, well, I mean, Donald Trump really is a gift to the American media. There's no doubt about that, in that every day he does something, maybe every hour he does something that can terrify one side or another on any given issue. And so we're constantly focused on it. And of course, we extrapolate out, we play the game of chess to say, and what that's going to mean in the end is this existential threat to all of us. And in the meantime, we're avoiding looking at all the great things that are still happening here. And that doesn't mean that I think that we should ignore him. I just think he shouldn't be the only news. I think that we should spend some time really focused on the other great things that are happening. Now, Neil, you met Bill Clinton. I love Bill Clinton. I worked with him on a variety of issues during the time I was mayor, certainly with his administration, made many great friends, people inside of it. But I think one of my favorite things about Bill Clinton is, in the spirit of John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, he had this, he does have still this optimism that he just carries with him. Was that your same experience?
Before I even give you my experience, I will say something that might be funny for all of you to hear. This is not my experience. I was listening to a 60-minute show with Barbara Walter interviewing Fox News, former Fox News anchor. Now I slip my mind. He's no longer there. Anyway, the name will come to me. And the format was Barbara Walter was asking Bill O'Reilly.
Right.
Was asking that I would mention a name, any name. You have no time to think about it. I would mention a name, and you have to react in a second. Whatever comes to your first thing comes to your mind. Very interesting. So he was mentioning this name and that name, and then he said Bill Clinton. There's no time to think, so there is no processing time. You have to say it right away. And Barbara Walter said Bill Clinton, and Bill O'Reilly said great president. Anyway, so for me, I deliberately mentioned that in the book because I thought it was so natural. There was no time to think, no politics. It's just your gut. Your initial gut was that's the word, and that's the word. So coming back to your point on him, I had the chance to observe President Clinton at many different occasions because we also went to Morocco, which was the first event of CGI outside the United States. I also attended. He also worked quite a bit with young people. So I was in many different occasions. I observed him, and I think, a couple of things comes to mind. None of them are surprising because these are public figures. You already know most of them. But I think two things comes across to me again and again is his sincerity and empathy and ability. There is a reason we call him explainer in chief. I remember in a meeting we're sitting down and President Obama talked about the healthcare plan. We're still trying to figure out what's happening. Then Clinton comes and he explains the healthcare plan, and everybody understood. So his ability to really, explain something in simple terms that anybody can understand, I think something I felt extremely powerful. Every time anyone talked to him, whether it's me or anybody I observe, and you know that, you feel you're the only person at that particular time. There's nobody else. His attention
He's
is
the
right
best at
with
it.
you, and he's talking to Paul and nobody else around you. And I'm not even talking about the memory because that's just, I think it's a gifting. It's insane to hear about a child in Rwanda, and he's giving interview to some media. I was there at the side just watching. He talks about a child in Rwanda. His or her name I don't even remember. And then in a second, he talks about a smart building in Amsterdam and the address. So I think some of it is also it's that it's just beyond my ability or most people's ability.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's a balance. I think the another thing, as we are discussing, sometimes I deliberately, Paul and Larry, I try to watch news from both perspectives so that I'm not in a silo, because I think I get very afraid. I'm a little worried and I don't know what's happening. So I deliberately watch other things, and I'm watching some flow of information on LinkedIn, and I can tell it's a very the LinkedIn post is very much on the right side of the conversation, uh, not a democratic liberal conversation. And I saw several posts constantly, complimenting President Clinton, how he handled the deficit, how he handled the budget. I found it fascinating because sometimes I intentionally try to understand where people are coming from. Anyways, I just thought I would share that.
Yeah.
President Clinton was, I had a number of experiences with him, but one of my more enjoyable ones was I had messed up, and I'm not going to go through all the details of it, but I went to Beijing with Motorola, and I ended up signing an agreement with the mayor of Beijing, and it ended up being a trade agreement, and I had no idea that the mayor of Beijing actually could legally sign trade agreements because they were appointed by the federal government. Of course, an American city cannot sign a trade agreement. Well, it turns out I ended up getting this call by Mickey Cantor, who's all upset and mad about it. And I ended up having to go to the White House to explain what it was that I had done. So in any event, we go in and we meet with Clinton, and he got a kick out of the story to kind of hear how the whole thing had evolved. And then from there, I ended up getting involved with Mickey and some other things. He was working on the GATT agreement at the time in Switzerland. But the best part about it was that night, President Clinton invited myself and a couple of other mayors back up to the White House. We sat there from 9 o'clock at night until 1 or 2 in the morning, listening to him tell stories. He was an amazing storyteller, and he had an amazing ability to draw you into the story and to hear your input. I'm one of those guys. If you give me a dialogue, I can go for an hour and a half, and I hate to be interrupted. He could figure out how to tell these stories, and by the time you were done, you were kind of a participant in the overall theater of it. But the next morning, he goes, tomorrow, we're doing a speech out on the Rose Garden. And he says, if you guys would like to come, you can come to it. So 6 in the morning, we go out to the Rose Garden. There he is giving his spiel. The guy had an amazing energy. Now, certainly there were some flaws that he had that we discovered over time, although I'm not sure we discovered him. I kind of think a lot of us knew him long before he ended up becoming president. But nonetheless, even there, his skill set was in the end to kind of ask for forgiveness, to find a way to talk about it in a way in which was vulnerable and yet still presidential. I found him to be amazing. Now, Larry, I'm going to come back to you because what I'd like to do is maybe spend a moment talking about the thesis that our book is rested upon, the idea of what it was that made America great. And certainly, Neil, you can kind of chime in after that and talk about how you saw it. But would you mind, Larry, describing the overall thesis of what we were trying to say and how that ended up being reflected, not just all the way, not just in the idea, but how the founders had tried to promote that and the philosophers that were behind it, and even today, the institutions that are promoting it?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth just spending 30 seconds talking about that foundation. So we really were focused on how America was designed by our founders and how much they were driven by certainly democracy values of ancient Greece, but many philosophers over the decades, over the centuries before the founders got together and didn't necessarily agree on very much, but they compromised on a lot and came up with a design that basically focused on the power, the freedoms, the rights of individuals. That even though the individuals collectively were giving up some of their power, and even though states collectively were giving up some of its power, to form the federal government, the fundamental power goes back to people, goes back to Americans. And that design, that focus on individual rights, freedoms, powers, responsibilities, was really what enabled people to flourish in America, to decide what religion they wanted to follow. Very early, the founders made it crystal clear. A lot of arguments today that's not true, but they're not right. That it didn't matter whether you were Christian or you were Jewish or you were any other religion. We had a treaty with the Barbary Pirates, of all things, where the founders and John Adams as president basically said, this is not a Christian nation. Our founders were moral people. This document is a moral document, and they were believers at the time, but they went out of their way to say freedom of religion matters. We don't want to establish a national religion, even though many of the states had established the Anglican Church as their state religion. Thomas Jefferson in Virginia went earlier to reduce that and remove that from what was happening in Virginia, and recognizing, again, individual rights. You decide who you want to believe, what you want to believe in. And then, from there, what job do you want? What education do you want? Who do you want to marry? Who do you want to love? Where do you want to live? How do you want to raise your kids? And, I call it, as a hardcore libertarian values. That wasn't a factor as such back in the founding days. But we really, really just tried to underscore the power of the individual that the founders created for America, and then protected the rights of minority individuals who were not in the power sphere, to protect them as they went through the walks of their lives. And as the document and as the interpretation and as the amendments evolved, we expanded those freedoms to all people in America.
Yeah, and for me, it's always been an understanding, or at least over the time that I spent in government, maybe it was an education for me to begin to understand how the individual played out in that. That if you look at these things, civil rights, equal rights, human rights, but also property rights, the ability to own what it is that you create, free markets, free enterprise, free elections, really, those are all fundamentally designed around the individual. In fact, our government's done a great many good things. We built roads and bridges. We even put a man on the moon. But at the end of the day, it was government empowering the individual over itself, which is the greatest act that our government did. And what it ends up resulting in is a guy like Elon Musk, who ends up creating a space capsule or a space rocket that, with private sector money, can be recaptured and reduce the cost of space exploration. It will result in extending human life, curing cancer, finding a driverless car, saving people who are dying on the roadways. All of those they're going to have a role that government's going to have to play in everything from educating our youth to making certain that we don't have as many regulations. But it's the individuals and their companies that are going to solve those problems. And that's very different than what we have found historically and what we find around the world in authoritarian governments. The idea that we empower the individual is where this great prosperity comes from.
I will start with a word called democracy. And the reason I'm mentioning this, both of you, you're born here, United States of America. I was born in India. So everybody knows India, according to the definition, the largest democracy in the world because of the population. And everybody knows America is the most powerful democracy in the world because of your wealth and your military power, other power you hold. And one other thing I'm telling my friends that we have taken it for granted. Democracy requires patience. Democracy requires perseverance, but democracy requires participation. And I am repeating this as much as I can because most of us do not even know what that means not to live in a democracy. Most of us cannot even fathom that what I'm saying is okay to say, as long as I'm not attacking, I'm not doing anything violent, that I can be arrested because of what I'm saying. Paul, you talked about a lot of stuff that is basic value of our Constitution. So I'm somewhat concerned when I see some of the chips around the democratic values. It doesn't matter whether it's the United States. I'm talking globally when I take a macro view of the word democracy. And I keep telling, it is messy, it is not perfect, but this is the only form of government that allows people who are not in power, which is me and most of us in this world, have a say. So So I think that is the reason I'm so much uh, reminding people don't take it for granted, because we think, oh, this is it, this is what we know, but it's not. I have been to countries that do not live in a democracy. I have seen the fear. I've seen the oppression. So I know what it is. I never lived there, but I know what it is. So what do we do with it? So I am really trying to say the core word I'm using of all these things that I'm trying to do. Book is just one tool. It's just a tool. Is engaged citizenship. So what do I define engaged citizenship? It's more than voting, Paul and Larry. Even voting, we have done better. I think 2008, it was 49% or so. I think it's 66% in the last two elections, which is great, but it's still not enough. Voting is just one piece of engaged citizenship. So that's the word I'm holding tight, engaged citizenship. To me, that means talk to people who don't look like you. Communicate with people who may differ from you. Number one. Number two, I will say, even there's a disagreement, listen to the disagreement. Even if you don't agree anything, Paul, you believe in. But if I don't listen, and I remember this, I'm working with a lot of grassroots organizations that is trying to bring the country together. I will name them in a minute. And the CEO of this organization said, Neil, disagreement is healthy. It creates innovation. And he stuck on my head. I said, yeah, that's the point. So number two, talk to people even if they do disagree. Listen to another perspective. I also believe that equal participation of conservative values and progressive values is important. I don't want public institutions to be held by one so much that the rest of the population feels they have they're losing out. There's a significant part of the country feels, rightly or wrongly, that somebody already set the agenda for them. They are losing out. They have no say. And that creates a lot of anger, And when you get angry, you blame somebody. It's a human nature. You blame. I have seen it in my own eyes in other countries. So number three, I'm saying, I think it's important that we do create a balance of conservative and progressive ideas, particularly in a public institution. And the fourth one of engaged citizenship, I think the most important one, which is the one I'm hoping till I check out from this world, I will spend some time, is how do we bring America together? And luckily, it's not starting from scratch. In the last 3 months, because of the book, I'm doing more research, and I've found 4 already. See, if I found 4, I'm sure there are more. One of them is called Stand Together. It is actually a very conservative organization by the Koch brothers. But what I heard, I got to talk to the CEO. I heard they're doing good things, but there are others. Listen First, Braver Angels, Us United. Us United is working with the sheriff in this country. They're trying to form a sheriff, bring sheriffs together in various states so Americans can meet at a church, at a gas station, at a synagogue, whatever they might be, to have those conversations. So number 4, I think, is able to bring these people together at a grassroots level, at a community level. And I'm thanking both of you to have done this kind of show, because that allows people to hear what we are talking about. We are all, coming back to the first thing I said. If empathy, as Larry said, is the DNA, then you have to somewhat understand me and speak my language to bring my empathy out. If you completely negate me, that that Neil is just a bad guy because he believed that he voted for this person, well, then it's very hard for me to show my empathy. So I think number 4, I say, coming back to the engaged citizenship, is have those conversations at the grassroots level. And there are many organizations doing that, just like you are doing your show and your book. I'm doing my 2 cents, but I'm meeting those people more and more and see where I can add value in this conversation.
Yeah, great, super.
All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to try to test our books against a couple of current issues, and I love the 4 steps that you spoke about. We have 5 in ours, and they're very similar, but probably the one that sticks out to me the most is the one that came from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and it's this whole idea of self accountability. I mean, the story of Solzhenitsyn has been told many times, but he wrote the book, The Gulag Archipelago. And in this book, he talks about how he had ended up in a German prison. And then when he left the German prison after fighting to help the Russians, he ended up in the Gulag. Stalin sent him to the Gulag. And And there were many reasons why he could have pointed his finger at Stalin and talked about how terrible it was that he was doing this to him and to other people who had been loyal communists. But he said he had to take a look at himself. And he thought about how it was his role in the military to actually help move out these kulaks, which are kind of poor farmers, considered to be rich farmer because they had one or two cows instead of no cows, but nonetheless to move them out into Siberia. And he said, I think of the 60,000 families that he sent out, none survived. But his point was he couldn't avoid that responsibility for what had happened. And what he recognized was that the ideological impacts of communism had taken this idea that we all have good inside of us and we all have some evil inside of us. Each one of us have the propensity to do either one. But what the ideology does is it allows us to separate it and to say, well, I'm a communist, so I'm good. And those people over there, those kulaks, they're evil. I'm sure somebody will clip this out with me saying I was a communist a moment ago, but nonetheless, in any event, the point that I'm making is that ideologically, it allows us to escape that responsibility. So I play this out like on the issue that's taking place today. LA, right? We have these riots that are going on. Trump has gone in and nationalized the National Guard. He's utilizing them to go try to enforce the rules. We have Gavin Newsom, who is kind of fighting back against that. And one way to do it is to step into that environment and to pick a tribe, right? And to use this whole idea of cognitive dissonance that says, well, okay, this is my tribe. Pick whichever one you want. This is my tribe. And here's why I think we're right and the other side is wrong. I look at it and say, well, let's see. It's obvious to me a couple of things. The first one is that we had an election and the American public voted in somebody who said he's going to focus on immigration. Doesn't matter that I agree with it. The majority of the public voted him in. It's also clear to me he should have to follow the rule of law. Figuring out what that is somewhat complex because you don't really have it figured out until you get to the Supreme Court. Oftentimes, you're having to add this time into it. But nonetheless, on the street, you have Gavin Newsom who's taking a position saying we don't really need them. I don't, I spent time as a mayor, and my guess is, and watching it, they don't really need them nationalized. I think he's probably right. The reason that Trump did it, he wouldn't have done this if it were a Republican governor. He would have stayed back and waited. But as a Democratic governor, it was too easy of an opportunity to poke his finger in the eye and to own the libs, as he likes to say, right? The ability to be able to own them. Gavin's response, I don't know that it's going to be a great response because effectively you now have you have both the police officers as well as the National Guard on opposite sides of the ledger. And that is a big risk for the people who are enforcing the law. Just having spent a lot of time with law enforcement, that is a big risk for them. So when I get done leaving it, I'm not quite sure that one side's any more right than the other. I think it's too bad that our leaders can't find a way to work together. But when I look at the situation, my answer is this is symbiotic of what's happening in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They both moved to their corners and they found an inability to talk to one another. And you could say, well, it's the other side's fault. Maybe, maybe it's the other side's fault. It doesn't matter. They can't talk to one another. They can't find common ground. We found an inability to be able to do that. And at least for me, when I look at this, my answer comes back to saying it doesn't represent where 80% of this country is. 80% of this country wants it to work. 80% of this country wants us to follow the rule of law, that like our law enforcement to work together. They want to enforce the border. They don't want a porous border, but they also want to be humane in the process. Anyway, I'd love to have your guys' thoughts as to how an event like that applies to the concepts that we spoke about in our books.
Well, I think it's important for readers, viewers, listeners to understand. First of all, the Constitution is the framework for all of this, and the Constitution creates, as I mentioned earlier, the most powerful entity are the people of America. Under the Constitution, the second most powerful entity are the states, and the third most powerful is the federal government. In the 20th century, we flipped that around. And so you get a president like President Trump who says, when I speak everything, I can do anything I want. Not per the terms of the Constitution. So you have this very weird circumstance that for a President Trump, and probably if it were a President AOC, would think the federal government has all this power, we can do anything we want. Well, I think the federal government has the power to protect federal immigration folks, for example, immigration facilities. I think you do have the power to send in troops, National Guard, whoever they are, to make sure that people are not damaging federal facilities. I don't think that's even a question. But the people who are voted in, as you mentioned, the majority voting in President Trump, not majority in California, but they also vote for their senators. They also vote for their governor. They also vote for their mayors. And, it's a mixed bag of government. And we, the people, have those powers. So I think it's a very confusing time for many people to see, exactly right, to see a governor and a president fighting each other when the people are going, can't you just simply work it out? And it's today, that is performance. That's just theater. That's just politics. That's just performance. It isn't solving the problem that we Americans want solved. If you have protesting is a core right of Americans. Protesting and disagreeing with what any government is doing is a core right protected by the First Amendment. So if protesters are there protesting peacefully, they have every right to do that. And to try to suppress peaceful protesting is outrageous by any government. To suppress conduct that leads to violence and damage and fires at building and destruction of vehicles or risks to personal safety of other Americans, that's a real problem. And I think we've lost sight of the fact what is the job of government? What is government protecting? It not only has to protect the property, it has to more importantly protect the people, and more importantly protect the right of those with a minority view to express very vocally, maybe very vehemently, but not without crossing a line into conduct and violence, express that they disagree with whether it's the state government or the federal government. So I think it's kind of tragic. It just looks like politics. It looks like politics on both sides. And I do think, people have said in the interesting discussion between Elon Musk and President Trump and the dispute there is that, well, now the senators are going to rally around President Trump. I think the people in California will rally around their elected officials there. They may not necessarily assume they are protecting the protesters. They're protecting the protesters. The people would say, I'm going to support my governor and I'm going to support my mayor. So I think it's confusing as to how that opinion will come out. It's just I think it's both bad politics and it's bad power.
All right. So, Larry, I'm going to give you, because you brought up Elon Musk, and then Neil, I'll let you kind of interject on how you see all this. But again, to me, I love politics. And to me, it's fascinating to watch how it happens, even when it's as disruptive as it is today. Inside Trump's administration, there really are three groups. There is the America Firsters, kind of represented by Stephen Miller and others. Then you have I'm going to call them the Reagan conservatives, which, interestingly enough, I would put Secretary Bassett in that category. But there are people who tend to believe that we have some reasons to be supportive of our allies. I think Marco Rubio represents that in large degree. They believe that we have a role to make certain that we're managing the budget and managing the numbers, and they tend to have more free market economic principles, unlike the America Firsters. But then you have these tech libertarians, the Elon Musk type, and the tech libertarians, they really just want less regulation and less government. But that's the coalition. Every movement has a set of coalitions that have to either figure out if they're going to work together or whether or not they're going to split up and act separately. By the way, I think our founders really liked the idea of factions moving around all the time on a constant basis. I think if you read the Federalist Papers, that would have been more of how they would have seen it, as opposed to one party or each party having a group of coalitions. But here's the point that I'm trying to make. So Elon Musk, I clearly think some of the things he said he didn't need to say, and I clearly think he made himself sound a little bit erratic. But there are two things that he did say that I thought were valuable. The first one was, we've got a problem with our budget. We really need to trying to deal with the deficit. think there's a big portion of Trump's coalition that believes that. Here's the second thing that happened in it, which is Trump has made comments that he's going to go after Elon's business. I don't think most people in the business community like the idea or the concept that a president now is going to target somebody's business because he didn't agree with him. In fact, I think that they may shut up about it, but they're not going to like it. And that's not going to help him get the fervent support that he needs to make his movement work. And that brings me to this conclusion. It's up to Trump whether or not he wants his coalition to work. If at the end of the day, he makes the decision that he's going to keep doing these things, it's going to eat itself. You don't have to worry about it. All right. Elections matter, candidates matter. In this particular case, it's the candidate. And if the candidate keeps doing it, he'll be there for 4 years. That's what we do in elections. All right. But at the end of that, he's going to cause himself a lot of problems with him and his factions. And that's how the American system is designed to work. And oh, by the way, on top of that, we have a court system. So all these things are going to be tested in court. When people tell me the balance of power is gone and America's headed towards an authoritarian side, it doesn't mean that there may not be authoritarian elements of any president who's ever been in. Here's my answer. Don't bet against the United States. It's a bad bet. It's just a bad bet.
I'm going to take a little different angle, for a long-term angle, for a reason, because what you said, I think it's all valuable. And the crux of this conversation is immigration, right? And of course, there are many brains working towards it that I'm not going to contribute to. I have a little different take, which I've been thinking for many years, but I'm speaking out now more vigorously. Getting a citizenship in this country is like owning a lot. Okay, so I feel that comes with responsibility. And this is kind of my voice I'm trying to utilize now, because I think I am, after 10 years of thinking about it, I'm able to speak about it. What does that mean? It means, and I have seen it across Europe, Paul and Larry, and it scared me 10 to 15 years ago, and I'm seeing that I was afraid this might come to America. Let me explain what I mean by that. I was seeing, I'm not comparing apple to oranges here. I'm seeing the lack of assimilation in Europe, right? A lot of immigrants live in a little ghetto, not everybody. And there's a lot of anti-immigrant feeling. And I saw, and I've been pushing forward for a long time. So I'll give you 4 things. When I say assimilation, I'm not talking about you're forgetting your heritage. I'm very much proud of my heritage. But Larry, if I don't understand you, you're not going to understand.
Right.
Paul, if I don't understand you, you will not understand me. So I am really talking about 5 things here. I'm writing about it. I'm trying to speak about it. I know it's controversial, but I will say, number 1, I think immigrant must learn English. I know it's not easy. Some of them are older. It's difficult. That's the reason we have public library. I'm going to put more resources for public education so we can give them a hand so they can learn English, number 1. Number 2, I really hope immigrants get engaged in their community in whatever shape, form it might be. It can be volunteer. You got to know your community. You cannot live in your little immigrant community. You got to be outside your immigrant community to meet other people, whoever they are. Number 2. Number 3, I must understand the local norms and regulations. Whatever the local norms might be, that comes back to, rules and regulation. I must follow it. There's no question about that. No question about it. Number 4, I must support my fellow immigrants. You mentor other people. A lot of successful immigrants are here, whatever country they came from. You mentor them. And number 5 is get active in politics, not just vote. And we talked about all the 5 things I mentioned. What do I mean by engaged citizenship? So I am taking a long-term view because things you mentioned are immediate, and I know you have a view, Paul, and you have a view, Larry, and that's fine. I'm not making any particular judgment on that, but I'm saying more from an immigrant perspective. When I see 10 years from now, 20 years from now, few of us may not be around. I want to see an America that, Larry, you explained, that we have individual rights. We have, the way you structured it, individual, state, and federal government, that we can coexist. Unity in diversity and engaged citizenship. But immigrants has a responsibility to be part of the fabric of America.
I think that's a great list, Neil. And I think before we run out of time, we want to make sure that you were going to mention the organizations you were working with, and I think it would be maybe a good time for you to do that.
Sure. I started joining Listen First. Braver's Angel, Us United, Convergence, Stand Together. So I'm just finding them as I go. And I'm hoping to engage as much as I can to make some small impact in this divided place.
Good for you.
So I see my view of this politically is um, we have two parties who, at their core, because of the low propensity turnouts that they have in their primaries, have turned to their most aggrieved voters, the people who are the most upset. And they are, in fact, grievance voters. They only represent about 20% of the United States. And even of that 20%, they're not all grievance voters, just the majority of them are. The 80% of us kind of want it to work, whether we're Democrats or Republicans. We kind of like what it is that we have. Now, I see this as an amazing opportunity or period of time in American history because there are new coalitions that are forming. Now, it is possible that we stick with the existing two coalitions, Democratic Party and a Republican Party. I'll give advice to the Democratic Party in a moment. From a Republican Party standpoint, here's what I would tell you. Um, they're, they're not talking about who's in the coalition. They're talking about who's out. I can tell you who's out. National security experts, intelligence officers, they're out. Many people who are higher up in the military that believe in the American world order, they're kind of out. The fiscal conservative, they're being cut out in this budget. They're being told, boy, that doesn't matter. The business community that thought that they were going to get less regulations and a smaller government, they're being cut out. That group of people have moved to the other side. They just have. And not because they wanted to, but because they've been kind of forced in that direction. Now, in the Democratic Party, think about this for a moment. So there were many good things that happened in the Me Too movement, if you ask me. It empowered women in ways in which they needed to be empowered. However, and I like this because of what you were talking about on immigrants, in the Me Too movement, no matter how you look at it, there were people who were harmed by it. There were people who were on the other side who maybe they did something wrong, maybe they didn't. We used to talk about this. The lady justice was a lady who had on a blindfold and a set of scales that she held up, right? The rule of law. And I can tell you, and having to have had dealt with a number of those complaints as mayor and in my own businesses, I don't know which way it tilts, but it's usually pretty even. Sometimes the complaint's not a fair complaint. And sometimes it's what happened to someone was completely unfair. But that's not what the Me Too movement wanted. They wanted to be able to accept immediately whatever it was that a woman was saying. Now, here's the challenge to that. The group of people that end up being harmed by it, first, they can't say anything. First, they're upset. Then they begin to move to the outside and they're silent. It doesn't take long before somebody comes along and sees them. And when they notice them and talk about their side, they will support them no matter what they do, no matter what law they break. So it's okay to create a coalition in your party that breaks apart a whole group of other people through woke ideology, through the Me Too movement, through a series of other things, to believe that there are good guys and bad guys, to believe that effectively that the old paradigm put white males and Jewish voters and whatever at the top and put everybody else at the bottom. And what you'd like to do is turn the pyramid around upside down, or the totem pole upside down, and put the other group at the top and put those groups at the bottom, as opposed to seeing people as individuals, to see them as a part of a group. But the result of that is you're making yourself smaller. That's what you're doing. Now, the question becomes, in those two movements, where does it go? Right? Because I can tell you, there's no doubt in my mind, the fiscal conservative and the pro-business person, they are not becoming Democrats. There is no way. They see the Democratic Party as being every bit as big a part of the problem as they've ever been. But those males who are now being ousted on the other side, they're many of them have a problem going to the Republican Party. Point I'm making is there's an opening. There's a great opening here for a new group of people. Now, that may be an open primary. It may be an independent movement. It may be the No Labels Party. There are lots of things that could end up meaning. But there's no doubt they're shifting ground. And I think that's healthy. I think it's healthy because every now and then, the system, there are groups out there who feel like they're not being treated fair, and they need a voice. Even when I don't agree with them, they need a voice. And through that voice, we relieve the pressure inside the system. And over time, we figure out whether or not it was right or wrong through this whole idea of the free marketplace of ideas. I look at this and say, gosh, to be honest with you, this just feels and seems a lot like what the founders actually intended and what they understood and what they knew would happen. I don't think we're on the wrong course. I think we're on the right course. It's corrective, but it's the right course. And it won't end up. The one thing I know about politics, it's not static. It will not be the same in 2 years. It may be a lot worse, but it won't be the same. It also could be a lot better.
No, I was smiling because deliberately I added Ross Perot. I had a pleasure of meeting him. He's just a phenomenal character. Again, you agree, disagree, it doesn't matter. He's just a phenomenal character. I got, his wife invited me to speak at one of his fundraisers, and I met him. But that talk about this movement that he created. Ross Perot is a great example. So yeah, I just thought about him as you were talking about this subject.
What's interesting is you met Ross and you also met Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton changed because of Ross Perot. Ross Perot, you could argue, well, he wasn't successful as a third-party candidate. And the answer was, oh, God, yes, he was. First, he was probably the key reason why George Bush lost. And number two, Bill Clinton was a smart enough guy that he said, oh, wow, we got to listen to this other side.
So well said.
That's the question for the Democratic Party and the Republican
So
Party.
well
If you
said.
want to, if you don't want a third party, just keep not listening. Just stick with this whole concept of there are good guys and bad guys. There's good and evil. Our side's good, your side's evil, and you're going to get another group of people. And here's what's going to happen when it takes place. You mark my words on this. They're going to become immediately indignant, and they're going to be talking about how they're entitled to have a two-person race, that why there shouldn't be third-party candidates. And the answer is, the reason there's going to be a third-party candidate and you're not going to get those one-on-one races, even though you think that the third party is going to be a spoiler, and they're probably going to be, is because you think you're entitled and you don't have to listen to the other side. You just keep digging in. You're not representing the majority of who this country is. The Constitution, Larry, you can talk about this, it didn't create a constitution around two political parties. That is not what happened. The two political parties came later.
Well, I don't have anything else to say on that. I think that's well said. Yeah. Well.
All right. So here's the last thing I'm going to ask everybody. I just gave mine, which is I'm still incredibly optimistic about this country. I believe not only is it going to work, it is working as it should work. As much as it irritates me every now and then, I think it's working the way that it's supposed to work. You had made mention, Neil, a moment ago. You have to speak up. You have to participate. There can't be a free marketplace of ideas if your ideas aren't being included. But you have to do that through a civil process, not through a violent process. And if you do it through a civil process, it's irritating because you won't get your way and it won't be exactly what you want, but it works. And as long as we keep doing that, as long as we stay committed to that, I'm very high about the United States and where we're going.
I would just say I'm optimistic, and I wrestle with whether I'm an optimistic realist or a realistic optimist. I think what we try to underscore in optimism is that eyes wide open. This isn't about ignoring problems. This isn't about being delusionally naive. This is about saying, "Ooh, that is a bummer." Is President Trump and some of the folks in the administration currently stressing the system? You betcha they are. Did President Biden and his folks stress the system? You bet they did. They stress it all the time, and so we have to be optimistic that we can recognize the stress, take that in, and then figure out how do we strengthen the systems. And I think, Neil, you've talked a little bit about that. We can do it, but it's hard and it's going to be messy and things are going to get broken and we're going to need to fix them. And then we're going to learn some lessons of things that we thought were the way it is and they aren't the way it is. And either we fix it better or say, that actually was a better outcome. And I think that's where my optimism comes in, that we can have eyes wide open. We can swallow hard. We can gasp a few times and then we roll up our sleeves, get back to work.
Not much I can add to that, but I think I started saying, when I talk about optimism, I also bring optimism of people outside the country also, because the world order depends a lot on the United States of America. It's just a fact. Whether we like it or not, it's just a fact. we really have both hard power and soft power. We have a responsibility, just like a citizen responsibility. A power like United States also a responsibility. So I was born optimist, and reason I started the conversation about the view, and then I end the conversation about the importance of engaged citizenship. And you have seen a lot more than I did, Paul and Larry, but in my 40 years, country has gone through COVID, recession. Of course, before that, many other things happen. We always come back and will come back.
Well said.
Neil, again, on your book, tell us about if somebody wants to buy your book, where they can order it today.
It's actually everywhere because it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart. But the best thing to do will be just to go to my website. It's www, my name actually, neilghosh.org. So all the options are there. And also you will find the organization Larry, you were asking. It's also listed there.
Good.
So neilghosh.org.
And the last question I'll ask you, Neil, is if you were to point to the 2 or 3 books that had the greatest influence on your book, what would they be?
It's a timing wise, I'm reading a lot of Yuval Harari. He's a Jewish historian based in Jerusalem. And he is writing a lot about future of AI. So I am absolutely digging that book on Nexus. I would recommend. It's just looking at a perspective, both the great things that you talked about, Paul, a little bit, but also the guardrails that we have to create. I think I will. That's a book I will recommend. Another one I will recommend. Just so happened, both of them I'm reading at the same time, the same author. 21st Ideas for the 21st Century by the same author, Yuval Harari.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate you being on the show today, and good luck with your book sales.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very, very, I would say I learned a lot. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you, Neil.
Us too. And then Larry, next time we'll talk about how AI, we should have talked about it on this one, about how AI, how we're dealing with AI in the marketing and promotion of our book. It would have been interesting to hear how Neil's doing it.
Yeah, we're using it a lot, Neil.
Yep. So, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness.